Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is another great day, another great week to study Matthew together. So glad to be with you. Hey, Bob, there in Kansas City. Christian, Brian, welcome. Glad you could join us live. Hey, Kathy. Andrew says, good morning. It's been a while since I've caught a live stream. Matthew has been great. I'm glad to hear that. That's cool. Brian says, love that song. Thank you. Me too. If you are listening via podcast and didn't hear the song, every Monday, Thursday, and usually Friday too, I play a song from my son's album. Mostly it's the song Beautiful Day. So if you want to check it out, look up Gabe Gooden wherever you listen to music and the song Beautiful Day, and maybe it'll make your day a little brighter. Hey, Sana, welcome back. Dale, Daniel, good to see everybody. So as we continue on with Matthew 17, actually going to wrap up Matthew 17 today, we have this interesting question put to Jesus about paying the temple tax, and then the miracle of sending Peter down to the sea to throw a hook in the water and catch a fish, and has the exact amount they need to pay the temple tax. It's interesting as we look at the dialogue here between Jesus and Peter to see that once again the apostles don't grasp the full significance of what it means that the Messiah is here. And I would argue that you and I, 2,000 years later, having all the scripture to read and study, we also regularly don't grasp the significance. Well, I say we. Maybe you and I do a little bit more than we used to because of our study, but I still have to remind myself of these things. And I think, as I say often, our systems of theology and our religious traditions and presuppositions distract us from what the scripture says and the practical implication of the fact that Jesus is the Messiah and the fulfillment of all the promises that came before. So, just thinking back through the last couple of chapters that we've looked at, do you remember the Canaanite woman? I think it was Canaanite. Now that I'm, Canaanite woman who wants Jesus to heal her child, and Jesus says, "No, I wasn't sent to you. I was only sent to Israel. And it's not good to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs." And she says, yes, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs. And remember what Jesus said? You, woman, have great faith. You believe who I am and what I'm able to do, more so than some others maybe. And just kind of scrolling through here, then he feeds the thousands with 7 loaves and a few fishes, again, like he had done earlier. And then we have this whole encounter where he warns the disciples against the leaven of the Pharisees, to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And you remember what their response was? Oh no, Jesus is upset that we didn't bring enough bread. And Jesus just says, what are you talking about? No, this is not about bread. Don't you remember? Twice already I have fed thousands with just a few loaves and fishes. Of course, I'm not worried about us getting hungry. I can make more bread. No, he says, I'm telling you, beware of these teachers, your leaders, and what they teach, because they reject me as the Messiah, and they are hypocrites, and they are looking to manipulate you, and they are under God's judgment. No, beware of their teaching. And trust me that I am who you have seen me display myself as. I can take care of food. That's not a problem. In fact, later on, he rebukes them and says, you could too. If you just had the faith of a mustard seed, you could tell that mountain to move, and it would move. And again, flipping on through here, he asks them, who do people say that I am? And they give their answers. Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter immediately says, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's who you are. And he believes that, but the full significance continues to elude him, because Jesus says, yes, I am. And I'm going to go down to Jerusalem, and the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees are going to put me to death. And then I will come back to life on the third day. And what does Peter do immediately? Pulls him aside. Jesus, stop talking that way. Stop thinking that way. No, that'll never happen to you. You're not going to die. You're the Messiah. Messiahs don't die. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block here. You're something that would trip me up if I continue to think like you are, because you're not thinking about the things of God. You're thinking about the things of men. And then he says, and you, by the way, you guys will also find yourself confronted with the cross or something similar if you follow me, because that's where your path leads, because that's where my path leads. He says, the kingdom is coming. Some of you are alive today, and you will not die until you see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. So you claim to believe that I am the Messiah. I am the Son of Man. Yes, I'm going to die. Yes, I'm going to come back to life, and I'm going to take my throne and become the king of the world. And some of you are going to be alive to see that. Do you believe me? He says. And then he takes Peter, James, and John up the mountain, and they fall asleep. And they wake up to see that Elijah and Moses have joined them on the mountain. And Peter, not knowing what to say, says, this is great. How about I build a tent to Elijah and Moses and you, Jesus? And what's the implication of that? He doesn't fully recognize the superiority of the Christ compared to these giants of the old covenant, Moses and Elijah. And he wants to pay tribute to all of them equally. And then the voice comes out of heaven, no, this is my son, you listen to him. And Elijah and Moses are gone. And they don't get it. They don't understand the full significance. They have just too small a view of these things. And that's when he comes down the hill and says, and the disciples, there's a guy that comes and says, my son is demon possessed, and these disciples of yours couldn't drive out the demon. And Jesus rebukes them all, said, oh, you little faithers. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know the significance of me being here and coming into my kingdom? If you just believed what I'm telling you and believed the power that I wield and therefore that you wield, you could tell this mountain to move and it would move. We just see this kind of thing again and again and again. And today we're going to see it yet again in this encounter about the temple tax. So, verse 24, and they have having come to Capernaum, and remember Capernaum is where a lot of Jesus's work takes place, his miracles, his teaching, and so on. So he goes back there, and those receiving the didrachmas came near to Peter and said, your teacher, does he not pay the didrachmas? So this is the tax that God required the Israelites to pay. In the Old Covenant times, it was a half shekel. Here, by the time we get to the Roman Empire, it's drachmas. But it's basically a drachmas was 1 day's wages. So two of them, didrachmas, it would be 2 days' wages. And that was what was required to pay for the upkeep of the temple and pay the priests and so on. So here's what's interesting to me, or at least one thing. So those whose job it is to collect this tax for the temple leaders, they come to Peter and say, hey, your teacher, Jesus, the guy over there, does he pay the temple tax? Why do you suppose they're asking? Why might they doubt that Jesus would instruct them to pay the tax? Well, we remember that already the leaders have said, Jesus, you are not requiring your disciples to wash their hands before they eat. So there's one example of him defying the traditions of the Pharisees, which is not the same as the Old Covenant law, but he did allow his disciples to forego that requirement by the Pharisees. We remember the eating the heads of grain in the field on the Sabbath day. And there Jesus says, look, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. So I decide what my disciples can do on the Sabbath. In John's gospel, we have a turning over of the tables of the money changers at the temple. We have that occurring at the beginning of Jesus's public display. In the other gospels, it comes at the end. So I suspect Jesus did it twice. If so, then these guys may already know that he's gone to the temple in Jerusalem and thrown out the money changers and rebuked them harshly, which maybe that word has spread. And now these guys in Capernaum are saying, so if Jesus is against the money changers and the temple collection there, which he wasn't exactly. There was, I think, a different motivation for turning them over than simply saying you don't need to pay these taxes. Anyway, you could see how this would all create some question in the mind of these guys. Is Jesus going to require his disciples and he himself going to pay this tax? Another interesting piece of this is Peter says, yes, of course he's going to pay it. Why would Peter say that? Has he seen Peter say it? Jesus say it? Has he seen Jesus pay it? Is it just an assumption? I think so, based on how the dialogue goes. I think Peter makes an assumption that, of course, Jesus is going to follow all the traditions. And, of course, he's going to follow the law. Which, again, from one perspective, especially as it pertains to the law that God gave, you could see why there would be an expectation that Jesus would follow the law. But it does seem like there is a presupposition on Peter's part that the Pharisees and priests are still the higher authority, that to buck their system comes, he just wouldn't expect that. I don't know. Obviously, I'm kind of speculating here, but there's clearly an assumption that Peter makes that Jesus will pay this tax. Eddie says, curious if there were rebellious groups who were known to not pay the temple tax at the time. I don't think so, because it came with a pretty steep punishment. Sana says, any significance to Jesus calling him Simon rather than Peter? I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. And that's the next verse here. So when he came into the house, so Peter answers and says, of course, the teacher is going to pay the drachmas. Then he comes to the house, and Jesus anticipated him, saying, what do you think, Simon? The kings of the earth, from whom do they receive custom or poll tax? From their sons or from the strangers? All right, so the tax collectors ask Peter this question. Peter responds with, of course, Jesus will pay it. Peter anticipates him as he comes to the house and says, hey, Simon, let me ask you a question, Simon. The kings of the earth, think about all the monarchs around throughout history. They collect taxes, right? From whom do they collect taxes? Do they collect taxes from their sons, or, and the translation here is from the strangers. This is a form of the word others. I think it's probably a little more a little broader than strangers, just others? Do these kings collect taxes from their own sons or from others and strangers, uh, as opposed to the familiar, meaning their own sons? All right, you got the question that Jesus is asking Peter? Kings, from whom do they collect taxes? From their sons or from others who are not their sons? Do you see the significance of what Jesus is saying here? What he's implying with his question. We'll unpack it if you don't. Peter says, from the strangers, from the others. Everybody knows kings don't tax their own children. They tax others. Jesus said, then the sons are free. Right? The sons of kings are free from the taxes required by the king. Are we clear on this? I saw a couple comments come in here. Daddy says, curious as to how the tax rate was determined and why the disciples' rate was the same as the rabbi. Actually, because the law required everyone to pay the same. We'll look at that in just a second. Text before system. Derek says, do you think there are grounds to use this as evidence that indicates Jesus obeyed the entire law? Maybe. Let's finish it up and see if there's any ramification there. Chimo 100. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that name. Get Screaming Goat out. I'm going on record. Good text to abolish income tax. That's great. Yes. All right, just for fun. There's a screaming goat. Very good. All right, so let's look at the original giving of this law in Exodus 30. So Exodus 30, verse 11. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, if you take the count of the sons of Israel in their review, they each shall also give a ransom for his soul to the Lord. A ransom for his soul or his life. So you take a census and you count up the number of Israelites, and each of the sons, each of the men, are to pay a ransom for his life. That's an interesting phrase. Maybe sometime we'll come look at that. But what I want to focus on is to whom God is requiring this ransom. To the Lord. And there shall not be damage among them in their review. This word damage in the Hebrew is punishment. I think it's sometimes translated plague. So if you don't do this, there will be severe consequences to the people. So pay this ransom to the Lord. And this is what they shall give, as many as pass along the review. The half of the didrachma, which is according to the holy didrachma. The didrachma is 20 obols. Now half of the didrachma is a tax for whom? For the Lord. Everyone who passes along for the review from 20 years and upward shall give the tax to the Lord. So if you're a 20-year-old man or older, you have to pay the tax to whom? To the Lord. The wealthy person will not increase. In other words, the rich person doesn't have to pay more than that, nor the poor person shall not decrease the half didrachma when giving the tax to the Lord. So you see, this is not a graduated tax. The wealthy person doesn't have to pay more. The poor person doesn't have to pay less. Everybody pays the same when giving the tax to whom? To the Lord. And I'll leave it there. That covers what. So that's the point. The Lord is demanding and commanding this tax to be paid. Now, if I would have gone on, it explains to cover the costs of the tabernacle supplies and pay the priests and so on. But I slowed down, pointed out each time, to the Lord, to the Lord, to the Lord. So that's the tax these Capernaum men are concerned with. And Jesus asks Simon, do kings require their sons to pay taxes? And the answer is no. Others pay the taxes, the sons do not. Sons are free from the tax levied by the king. What is Jesus saying to Peter? Do you see it? Daniel says, not sure yet. But he loves the screaming goat. Sana says the screaming goat made her dog bark. That's hilarious. That's so funny. All right, what is Jesus getting at here? Anybody? Well, Daniel says, oh, I think I see it. Trekka says, Jesus paid to make us free. Yes, he did. That's not what's going on here. Daniel, what do you see? What do you think? Since we are sons of the Most High, we no longer pay a ransom. Yep, that's good. Nope, that's not what's going on here. So tithing goes away. Nope, has nothing to do with what's going on here. I like the way you're thinking. I like the you're thinking along the lines of typology and all of that, but that's not what is happening here. Brian, you are the son, so you are free. Who's the you as you in your statement? Since you capitalized S, are you so? Well, I'm not gonna. Darren says Jesus is a son, so he doesn't pay the upkeep of the temple. Yes. Daddy says, Daddy 08, as a son, he's not required to, but yeah. Well, our behalf. Let's not go to our yet, because we're not in this story. Think about the significance of this. The tax was to be paid to the Lord. Peter assumes Jesus will pay the tax. Jesus says, hey, Peter, do kings require their sons to pay the tax? Pay any tax? No. The son is free from the tax. What is the implication? Jesus is the son of the Lord. He does not need to pay this tax. Peter, you answered hastily. You didn't think this through. I am free from an obligation to pay the tax to the Lord because I'm the son. The others, the sons of Israel, have to pay the tax to the Lord because they're not his sons. I am. I'm heir to the throne. I'm not required to pay a temple tax because I'm in a different category from all of the rest of the Israelites. Peter, who am I? I am the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He's my Father. I'm his son. You heard the voice say, today I've begotten you. You are my son. I'm well pleased with my son. I'm the son. Sons don't pay taxes to the king. So no, Peter, I have no obligation to pay this tax. It's a subtle admonishment, maybe even a subtle rebuke, trying to get Peter to think through all of the implications of the fact that he is the Messiah and to put him under the requirements of the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees and the priests, to put him under obligation to submit to the traditions of the Jewish leaders, to make him co-equal with Moses and Elijah, to make him equal or under the leaders, to make him under or inferior to Abraham, for instance, or David. Now, obviously, none of those men come into play here, but drawing from the broader gospel encounters with the Pharisees, we know that that's what they try to do. Abraham is the greatest, and David is the king, and so on. Jesus is trying to get Peter to understand, this is who I am, Peter. I'm the son of the Lord. I don't have to pay taxes. Does that make sense? Everybody tracking with that? Yeah, oink. Exactly. He's the son over the house, not a servant like Moses. Yeah, as Hebrews says. Yeah, very good. Son, that's funny. Daniel says, got it. Makes sense. Cool. Brian says, he is the son and we are adopted, so we are the son. Yeah. Well, let's not apply that just yet. Not to cause problems, but he pays anyway. Yep. Kathy says, got it. I don't think I've ever seen specifically thought of that question. Jesus. Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah, so that's the point. And then Jesus says, but that we may not cause them to stumble. I'm not looking to trip up these tax collectors in Capernaum. That's not my goal here. Right? So we don't give them something to trip over. Go down to the sea, cast a hook. There'll be a fish there. Take it up, open its mouth, and you will find a stater, which is worth 2 didrachmas. So it's exactly the amount that is needed for Jesus and for Peter to pay the tax. So your extensions here of him paying the tax for us kind of thing, it's going beyond the text. That's not the point. Paying for Peter, he tells us what the purpose is. Right? That we may not cause them, the collectors, to stumble. So to extend this and say he paid the ransom for all of us, maybe, but that is going beyond what the text actually says and goes beyond what Jesus specifically explains as his reason for this. Now, some of you said, I think it's probably inherent in his statement that the disciples, if they are, faithful to him, they will be included as sons and free from the tax. Anyway, I like the way you're thinking. I like that you're thinking of, how does this typologically apply? But let's just be careful. When Jesus gives us the precise purpose for paying the tax, it's so that these collectors in Capernaum aren't tripped up. I certainly would be hesitant to go beyond that. I might say it could be, right? And it's a good picture of Jesus paying the ransom for his people, but we just have to be a little careful, I think. And he says, what about the rest of the disciples? Did they pay the tax? I have a theory, but would like to hear your perspective. I know this is not the point of the text. My guess is yes, simply because of the same reason. Jesus isn't looking to raise a big stir here in Capernaum, especially with these collectors. They're just doing their job, and the big to-do is going to happen in Jerusalem later. So my guess is yes. As Jesus tells Peter, do not concern yourself with the others. It can cause them not to. Peter's still not getting it. Jim says, yeah. And they all are slow to get there. And that's why Jesus has to teach them, correct them, on and on and on. So as we wrap this up for us, I continue to try to stress to you and to me all these promises of what it means that Messiah has come and the kingdom was established 2,000 years ago. The kingdom promises are here and now. Yesterday at our fellowship, we sang Joy to the World. My guess is you have or will sing Joy to the World in the next couple of weeks, if you haven't already, and probably will do it again, right? At church, you'll do it. You'll hear it on the radio, whatever. Radio, does anybody listen to the radio anymore? You'll play it. You'll have it in your playlist. That's not a Christmas hymn by Isaac Watts. That is an ascension hymn. Isaac Watts understood that he rules the world now, and he is making the nations prove his righteousness now, and that his glories extend as far as the curse is found. The risen Messiah King is undoing the curse of God's punishment for Adam and Eve's sin. He's doing it now. It's not a future thing. This is why I'm constantly trying to show you from the scripture that peace is going to conquer the earth, and technological advance and prosperity and disease being eradicated, or at least diminished in its power. These are all things that I'm persuaded the scripture says will happen when Messiah comes, and he has come. And I think in the last, certainly in yours and my lifetime, we have been so influenced by those who say, no, the kingdom is not yet, and that the world is getting worse and worse and worse and worse, that we just don't see the scripture that's right in front of us, that the Messiah has come. His kingdom is expanding. We should expect the fulfillment of the promises for the world that God said would come to pass when the Messiah comes. And I think, and I say this to myself too, I have to, I ask myself every morning as I'm making my coffee, do you believe? Do you believe the promises of God? Do you trust him? Do you believe him? I do, every morning. Doug, do you believe? And I walk through what is true to remind myself of this. Because I see, Peter, these men who watched Jesus do incomparable, miraculous things, and they still didn't get it. I want to get it and live in light of it. And I want you to. So let's be better than Peter. Jim says, your teaching approach is really opening my eyes. Many thanks. Good. See it and believe it and act upon it. Yes, very good. Daniel says, read an article that at our pass by 2100, many will reach the age of 100. Yep, I'm planning on it. I'm planning to live to be 100. You should too. I don't know. I'll let you decide if you. Well, yeah. Anyway, let's leave it there. Have a great day, everyone. We will pick up in chapter 18 tomorrow. Grace and peace to you.